What is Black Canary's favorite game? Hide and go shriek? Welcome to my YouTube channel for Comic Book Editions Volume 179. A couple weeks ago, the last weekend of January, I went to another Comicverse toy and collectible show in New Berlin, Wisconsin. I picked up some great things there in the past and wanted to go back to see what I could find. Today I'm going to share my haul from that event with you. Man, that place was hopping too. I had a really good time. Thanks for stopping by to check out what I picked up at this event. Oh, with Valentine's Day coming up tomorrow, I wanted to share something Valentine's Day-ish, which will come up later on in this video today too. When I was trying to decide what order to put everything together, I thought, why not just show you in order of the way that I bought it? So let's get started. Getting some Supergirl with Adventure Comics number 368. This was the first book to make me pull the trigger in making some purchases at the Comicverse Toy Show. I tend to try to go through as many booths as possible and then circle back around, unless I see something that's too good that I'm scared might get bought before I get a chance to come back and get it. This time I made a full circle around before I came back to the very first vendor and picked up this 1969 comic book. We have a Curt Swan cover here. As typical from this era, we have two different stories in here, both with Supergirl. Mystery Monster is a story that's depicted on the cover, and spoiler, the mystery monster ends up actually being Mr. Mxyzptlk. That's how I pronounce his name. I know some people call him Mr. Mxyzptlk. Gosh, that's not easy to say. I call him Mr. Mxyzptlk because that's the way they pronounced him in the Super Friends cartoon when I was a young Magic Lasso, so that's what I call him. The second story is called Godmother of Steel, and this is essentially just a takeoff of Cinderella. The story of Cinderella with Supergirl playing the fairy godmother role. This next comic book, take a look at this. Does this not look like a Magic Lasso comic book to you? It certainly does to me. This is Fantastic Four number 159. So the first thing that I remember about this cover is Mead licensed this in a series of products. They had like Mead back to school binder, notebook, and I think a folder. And I think I had the folder when it came to this. I know that I had this, and I was very familiar with this image. And it certainly brought back memories. I can't believe I didn't actually get a copy of the comic book until now. Rich Buckler did this cover. 1975 was the year that Fantastic Four number 159 was released. We find Sue Storm rejoining the team in this issue with Medusa, who had been filling in for her, leaving the team for Sue to come back. And also Johnny Storm's red costume that he had been wearing for quite some time, he stops wearing that and goes back to his traditional blue costume, his original blue costume in this story as well. I've been really into this era of FF, especially the era with Medusa filling in as a member for Sue Storm. And it was at actually a different Comicverse show that I picked up a Fantastic Four comic book that kind of got me into that. Another run that I'm collecting is Daredevil, but I'm trying to get the issues that featured Black Widow as a guest star and then eventual co-headliner. And this is Daredevil issue 124, also from 1975. This time it's Gil Kane doing the artwork. This is the last issue that Black Widow appears in. After this, or actually during this issue, she leaves and then Daredevil goes back to being essentially a solo character. But the first 5 or 6 pages are devoted to Natasha leaving Daredevil. And then her next appearance would be in Champions issue number 1. It's interesting that this issue has 2 different writers in it. So there's one writer that wrote like the first 16 pages, and then the second writer, which I think the second writer was Marv Wolfman, wrote the remainder of the story too. And it kind of definitely has a definite divide in the book in terms of shift of story and tone. At least that's what I thought. So Black Widow started her appearance in Daredevil issue 81, and then this issue 124, as I mentioned, is the last one to feature her. So my run of Daredevil that I'm really working on are those issues between 81 and 124, and I still have a lot more to get. but I've been really enjoying the issues that I have picked up, and this is a good fit for me. This era of Daredevil is definitely a good fit for me. So sticking with the same seller, I went over to his dollar bin portion and I found this, and I was happy to find this because this is Marvel Team Up issue 116 from 1982. And I was happy to find this because I had been looking at this comic book on a different website and had been thinking about it for quite some time and hadn't pulled the trigger. Well, I'm glad I didn't now because I ended up finding it in a very nice condition in the dollar bin. So it's a John Romita Jr. JRJR cover, and it's Spider-Man teaming up with Valkyrie. We have guest appearance by Thor. So it's kind of the conclusion of a two-part story. The previous issue, 115, was a Thor story that continues into this issue, but I don't think Valkyrie was in issue 115. Valkyrie picks up in this issue and becomes the team-up superhero for Spider-Man. Great artwork, though. Really digging the cover. Thought that's cool. I like Valkyrie, and you're going to see more Valkyrie in just a minute. But right now, you're going to see more Spider-Man. So Spider-Man, Storm, and Power Man was a promotional comic book that came out like they would hand out for kids in school. And the purpose is to deter them from smoking. So you've got Smokescreen as the villain in this story. I don't remember this promotional comic book. The biggest promotional comic book that I really remember is Teen Titans and the Drug Abuse, which I have that. But this came out in 1982. There's one source that says it came out in December of 81, but the copyright in here says 82. I think this is also reprinted in like 1995 and handed out again to schools. There's 3 different versions or 3 different printings of this, and the way to tell them apart is the background color behind the clouds. And to my knowledge, this is the first printing. At least that's what I've been able to determine from looking online, that this is the first printing. I took the backing board out because I wanted to be able to show you the back cover as well. Kind of an interesting pairing to put Spider-Man together with Power Man and Storm, but it works. This is exactly what you think it's like having health class, you know, in a comic book with the dangers of smoking and the statistics. And then at the end, it gives the children a chance to, what would you do in this scenario if you were offered a cigarette? You know, write your answer in, like a little workbook activity too. I don't know how I didn't know about this comic book until the last couple of years, but I didn't. Or if I did, I totally forgot about it. But since it came back on my radar as one that I was interested in, and seeing it in the dollar bin, I'm like, yep, not going to pass that out. Not going to get it any cheaper than $1, that's for sure. Promised you more Valkyrie. There's more Valkyrie here. Defenders Volume 1, issue number 91. This is from 1980. Awesome cover. Love seeing Hellcat and Valkyrie fighting. So all the Defenders, with the exception of Hellcat, are under the mind control of the Mandrill. And it's up to Hellcat to free them from all of that, which she does in this issue. I really need to get more serious on my Defenders collecting. This is a run, you know, that lasted just over 150 issues. But it's a run, especially maybe not the first 20-some issues, but after that, those books are cheap. Especially, you know, the late 70s to the mid 80s, to the end of the run in the mid 80s. Those books you can find, like I did, in really nice condition in the dollar bin. So whenever I see one, I want to try to pick some of those up. I'm not focusing so much on that portion of my collecting, but at some point I probably need to step it up. And then one more book from the dollar bin from this seller. It's Trinity, Volume 1, issue number 52. This is from 2009. If you remember my Comic Book Editions Volume 143 video, Rob Boswell AOK'd me a whole bunch of these Trinity books. So that's kind of kickstarted me into trying to collect the run as well. The stories that I've read so far I really have enjoyed. I left the backing board out of this as well to show you that it's got a back cover there. And this is the final issue of the Trinity series as well. So I've got a bunch to fill in to be able to have the full set, but for $1, you can't pass it up, can you? So at this point, I switched to a different seller at the show and picked up some more adventure comics starring Supergirl. So this is Adventure Comics, Volume 1, Issue 398. It's from 1970. 2 stories in here once again. The first story is actually a reprint of a Supergirl backup in Action Comics number 308, and that's where the cover comes from, the reprinted story from Action Comics. I went and looked at the original cover for Action Comics, and the original cover doesn't show Supergirl anywhere there, so they took that backup story and decided to make that focus worthy of the cover, and I think that this is a fantastic cover as well. This is Dick Giordano, if I'm remembering correctly. I like this so much that I ended up, as you saw, probably using this as the thumbnail for today's video. Adventure Comics Volume 1, Issue 384, 1969. Now, Kurt Swan cover. Supergirl decides to try computer dating, and she uses the computer in the Fortress of Solitude to find her a mate. And she thinks she's fallen in love, but I wouldn't say that the chemistry is necessarily there. We have a Kurt Swan cover. So the Supergirl run of Adventure Comics is something that I am working on as well. That runs from like issue 381 through 424, I believe. And the same seller still had more Supergirl, so I said, yeah, let's pick it up and let's do it. Adventure Comics Volume 1, Issue 393. This is 1970, Kurt Swan cover, once again. The Unwanted Supergirl. I think that Supergirl is getting a lot of attention the last couple of weeks, especially now with the announcement and confirmation of Millie Aycock going to play Supergirl in the new James Gunn DCU. So I thought she looked a little bit like Leanne Rimes myself, but she could make a good Supergirl. And then, wouldn't you know it, got one more Adventure Comics that featured Supergirl. This is issue number 412 from 1971. This time it's Bob Oxner doing the cover art. This is kind of a wonky costume for Supergirl. And inside, they have a couple splash pages where they kind of explain Supergirl's new costume and how they were a hybrid of 2 different submissions from 2 different fans. It's interesting. So being able to, come home with 5 more Supergirl comic books from her headlining status in Adventure Comics that I didn't have really knocks down my collection of what I need. I still got a little bit to go. There's at least 11 Supergirl headlining comics that I still need from Adventure Comics, possibly 12. And the reason that I say possibly 12 is there's an issue that's a reprint. It's like a giant reprint, but it's all Legion of Superheroes stories. So it's not really Supergirl as the headliner, but Supergirl is one of the Legion of Superhero members. So I haven't decided if I'm going to include that in my run or not include that in my run. I haven't made up my mind yet. Superman's Girlfriend Lois Lane, issue number 87. So as I was heading to the show, I kind of had mentally maybe four or 5 books that I'm like, I'm going to try to look for or possibly come home with some books. One of those was some of the Lois Lane stories in the 100s that featured Rose and Thorn as a backup because I really enjoyed that so much. And I did see some of those at the show, but they just weren't in the price point that I wanted them to be. This one ended up being the price point that I wanted to be, even though it doesn't have the Rose and Thorn storyline. This is 1968, and I thought, but it's one of those, if I can't have one of the if I can't have one of the Lois Lanes with Rose and Thorn in the backup, then I at least want one of the great Neal Adams cover Lois Lanes. And this is one of those with Neal Adams doing the artwork here. Lois Lane essentially gets superpowers, and she's like, well, Superman, you don't have an excuse for not being able to marry me now. Because that was the ultimate goal for her. And then the powers fade, and she finds out that it's related to a scientist in Kandor. She ends up being able to go to Kandor, gets her powers back. She's told permanently, and then she's told she can't ever leave Kandor, and that creates all sorts of problems. So that's the basis of the first story in this issue. And then the second story, called The Jealous Lois Lane, is a reprint of Superman's Girlfriend Lois Lane, issue number 31. Next up, Justice League of America, Volume 1, Issue 124. from 1975, Ernie Chan doing the cover art here. Let me tell you the good news and the bad news. The bad news, I'll do the bad news first. The bad news is this does not count towards the Justice League of America books that I need to get. That's because I already had this issue. I just wanted to upgrade condition-wise the copy that I had. So it doesn't count for the list of books that I need, the one a month for the next 3 years. This does not count towards it. Boo. But the good news is it's an upgraded copy. So, and I got it at a very good price. This is the end part of another JLA JSA team up. The JSA supposedly are dead, and the JLA heads to Earth 2 to take care of what the JSA wouldn't be able to take care of. At the end, they kind of promote that the Justice Society are getting their own book called Super Squad. We know that would actually turn out to be a revival of All-Star Comics, starring the Super Squad, but All-Star Comics would be the actual title of that. But this is kind of like, I mean, if a comic book was a TV show, this would kind of be like a backdoor pilot for that, essentially. There are a couple other Justice Leagues I need to upgrade in my collection from what I already have, plus keep chipping away at the ones I need to get down to have a complete set. I switched to a different seller after those purchases. Here's a book that I've been wanting for quite some time. This came out in 1989. This is Captain Marvel, Volume 2. Issue number 1, it's a one-shot, a giant-sized one-shot. Mark Bright doing the cover art on here. I'm a big Monica Rambeau fan. I always enjoy that character. I didn't end up getting her first appearance, until in the last 3 or 4 years or so, which is surprising because I have so many other appearances of her as well. I haven't had the chance to read this yet, but I'm going to look forward to doing that because, like I said, I do enjoy the character. This is a book I've been looking at for some time. It was real cheap. It was like a $1 bin book. And then when the announcement of Monica Rambeau into the MCU was announced, this book kind of shot up pretty high in price and has again started to cool down. It hasn't cooled all the way back down into a $1 bin book again, but it has cooled back down in price. And I thought this was definitely probably the biggest impulse purchase out of everything that I did at the Comicverse show. And I just wanted to read it, so I thought I'm going to. Now, I know that Disney Plus now has the Marvel streaming on their app, and I haven't watched the movie yet, but I'm definitely planning on doing so. If you've watched it, make sure to leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought. Maybe you even saw it in the theaters. I didn't get a chance to see it in the theaters, but in the next few days, I'm definitely going to stream it. That is on my to-do list. So here's the most expensive book that I bought at the show. I've been wanting this for quite some time. So when I said that I had a list in my mind of, maybe 4 or 5-ish books that I wanted to come home with, this one I did want to come home with because I saw it at the show last time. And I think it was the same seller, so I was still lucky that he hadn't sold it since. It's Green Lantern Volume 1, issue number 78. Once again, we have a beautiful Neal Adams cover. This time we have a book from 1972, I think. No, 1970. It's 1970. This was a great story. Very Black Canary heavy focused story, but I really enjoyed this story. I think this cover is fantastic. I'm a fan of yellow covers as well, and that definitely qualifies for this. So the condition was very nice. Like I said, paid a little bit more for this one, more than anything else that I'm showing in today's video, but I wanted it. And I didn't make a top 12 goal list for the year. I didn't do one last year either, but had I made one either last year or this year, this book would have been on it because this is one I have been hunting for quite some time and just haven't been able to find it at the right price or in the right condition. Everything aligned to the show, and I was stoked to bring it home. The fact that it was a good story, a Denny O'Neill story, was just more icing on the cake. So those last 2 books I showed you, Green Lantern and the Captain Marvel, came from one seller. And if you bought from him, he gave you a special little treat. He had some vintage Valentine. So I thought this would be a nice little treat to throw in with Valentine's Day coming up tomorrow. This is a 1980 DC Comics Superman and Wonder Woman Valentine. I actually remember being a kid in school, and we had to make little mailboxes out of sacks and decorate them. And then you had to buy Valentines and go around and deliver all your Valentines into everyone's little mailbox. Everyone was required to receive a Valentine from everyone else. And I actually remember having these, and they did these Valentines for several years in a row with different designs. But I remember having the DC Comics ones for several years. So this brought back some great memories. And just seeing some of those Valentines on the table is pretty cool. I mean, they even had one with Mira on it. How many Mira products were there out in 1980? You know, not that many, that's for sure. So that was a nice little bonus from buying. And before I left the convention, I swung over to one more seller and decided I really wanted to pick up an Avengers 168. So it's Avengers Volume 1, Issue 168 from 1977. George Perez doing the cover and interior artwork. This cover is everything. I just think that this is such a fantastic cover. The story is part of a longer storyline going on with the Guardians of the Galaxy guest starring. So essentially in this book, we have at the beginning an Avengers story about who's broken into the mansion. And I won't say who it was, but it was who I thought it would be. And then the story flips to this Starhawk portion of the story with Guardians of the Galaxy. I mentioned last week in my Comic Book Editions 178 video, I showed you I had picked up Avengers 169. And now I have 168. But I mentioned last week, you know, I was only 3 issues away from having a 100+ consecutive run of Avengers. And I looked it up, and that is true. I'm 3 issues away from having Avengers Volume 1, Issue 168 through 280. So I'm only 3 issues away from that. I want to get those remaining 3 issues so I can have that long 100+ consecutive stretch and run in my collection. I want to pick up those last 3 issues sometime this year, hopefully. What was your favorite out of everything I showed today and picked up at the Comicverse show? I would love to know. Make sure to leave your comments below. Subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. Share the channel with someone that you think might be interested in this video or my content. And help me grow the channel and get to 1K, still the goal. You know, we're at 750+ strong now, which feels good. So I got the first 3 out of 4 portions completed and working on that last one right now, and could definitely use your help. It is appreciated. Your support means the world to me. Back Issue of the Week YouTube short is on my channel. It's live now. If you didn't check that out yesterday, spend 60 seconds to learn about a back issue in my comic book collection. Fanboys Live and the Retro Review is on my channel this upcoming Sunday with Comic Food 2814 and Signature King Tony Fett. So we'll be retro reviewing a great DC Comics book and talking about the latest DC Comics news as well. We call it the greatest DC Comics show on YouTube. You find out why when you tune in. That brings us to the end of Comic Book Editions Volume 179. Thanks again for making it to the end and your support. Have a fantastic and safe week. Take care.